Welcome to the last and final segment of Bureaucracies, the politics of bureaucracies. Today we're going to focus on some of the outstanding ramifications of the patronage versus the merit system. Just to refresh your memory, patronage means that people used to get jobs based on who they knew or the connections that they had in Washington, D.C. Today, people can only receive a job within the bureaucracy if they have shown that they are deserving by an interview, by their training, or an educational degree that they have obtained. We have two acts that really focus on this idea of patronage versus merit. The first act was the Pendleton Civil Service Act that was passed in 1883. This act outlawed patronage and required that all civil servants who were hired into the government be deserving and that their hiring was based on merit. The Hatch Act was passed in 1940. This act essentially makes it illegal to engage in partisan politics. A really good example of this came from one of my students a few years ago. Her father worked for a government agency and was also extremely political. On the back of his car, he had posted many different bumper stickers of different partisan politicians that he supported, such as Obama and O'Malley. He was asked by his government agency to remove the stickers from his car as he was violating the Hatch Act. Some other examples of this are something that took place in my husband's office. My husband works for the Library of Congress. Someone within his office used their time to create an editorial in the Washington Post that explained things from a partisan politics point of view. Essentially what this means is, if you work for a federal agency, you can't be too partisan. You can't express views that are way too liberal or way too conservative. I will caution you that this does not mean that if you work for Congress, that is the same thing. Obviously, if you work for a Republican congressman or a Democratic congresswoman, it is expected that you are very Democratic or you are very Republican. One of the results of this extreme focus on merit is that it's very difficult to fire people who are incompetent. The reason that this is because firing them may be seen as a political move, and that you're doing it based on patronage, you know someone better or you like someone better for the job, and not necessarily on what they've done in their job. One of the biggest reasons that this occurs is because if a new administration came in and fired all of the people who did not belong to his or her political party and hired all new people who did belong to his or her political party, that would be extremely unfair. The fact that the federal agencies are filled with people who are incompetent is one of the biggest criticisms, but may also be one of the biggest misunderstandings about the federal government. Lastly, we have the iron triangle. We've discussed this before in previous units. The iron triangle has three components: an interest group, a subcommittee, and the last one that we're discussing now, a bureaucratic agency. So hopefully now that we've learned all of these units, all of this will really come together. The interest group first comes up with an idea that they would like to see put into action. Maybe it's something like pollution. They ask Congress to pass a law that has to do with pollution, such as the Clean Air Act. And finally, it is the bureaucratic agency, the Environmental Protection Agency, which is responsible for making sure that businesses follow this act. The biggest power that bureaucratic agencies have is they come up with specific regulations that go along with the Clean Air Act. They can also punish companies and businesses who break those rules, and they can hold hearings and make sure that they are following the law as set out by Congress. Finally, in another effort to not allow the executive branch too much control over bureaucratic agencies, it is actually Congress who creates new agencies. For example, the last cabinet department that was started was the Department of Homeland Security. Shortly after September 11th, the president urged Congress to create this new cabinet department to help oversee things like terrorism and domestic and international spying. I hope that helps, and if you have any questions about anything about the bureaucracy, please don't hesitate to ask.